2025 is loaded with insanely good indie games, and with my last video being the best one I've made yet, I decided to make a part 2. So welcome to more underrated games of 2025. So like the last time, every game will be split into 3 sections: a short intro to the game, a longer description of the game, and a final verdict with recommendations on who might like that game. With the first one being Shape of Dreams. Shape of Dreams describes itself as a roguelike with MOBA elements. And while you could say that's right, I personally would describe it more like a Path of Exile or Diablo as a flashy roguelike. Because while MOBAs are tactical and team play based games, Shape of Dreams more focuses on destroying hordes of monsters with the help of characters and abilities you get throughout the run. What does this game really well is the variety you get between the runs, because you have around 8 unlockable characters which you can choose and customize, with everyone having complete different playstyles and abilities. You also have multiple game modes and difficulties to choose from, and when you are in a run, you get abilities to choose from and gather buffs to make yourself stronger and make your own builds. And while the first area and boss is the same every time, there are multiple random areas and bosses afterwards. So yeah, your runs will almost never be the same as another. But let's get to the more detailed part. The story of Shape of Dreams is pretty simple. A random dude called Primus was really sleepy and started sleeping so strong that the world mixed with the dream world. And now heroes fight against creatures of the dream and try to get to the heart of the dreams so they get infinite V-Bucks or so, I don't really know. But anyways, most of you probably aren't interested in this and more in the gameplay and quality of the game, so let me get straight to it. Well, the gameplay is your average QVER MOBA gameplay, where you have 3 abilities, a passive and an ultimate ability. And with said spells you kill enemies and bosses, all while not trying to die, because in this game dying means losing a run and starting all over again. So like I said previously, every character has different playstyles and starts with a passive and 2 signature abilities. And 2 empty spell slots, which you have to fill up with randomized spells you find in a run. When you start a run, you are greeted with a map, where you have a goal you have to get to, but you can choose your own route on how to get to the goal, but you don't have infinite time, because for every move you make on the map, hunters are starting to get closer, which are way more powerful enemies without much loot or reason to fight. And so you have to get as quickly as possible to your goal, but also explore as much as possible to get more spells and buffs which makes you stronger. So buffs in this game are separated in 2 different kinds. The first one being your average stat buff like 10% more attack speed, but the other ones are these special stones, which enhances your ability of your choice. And these can differ from your spell has less cooldown, to every time you cast that spell you shoot out multiple homing knives. But anyways, if you reach the goal of an area, who would have guessed, a boss spawns, which you have to defeat. And afterwards you get to the next area with more difficult enemies and bosses. And this loop goes on until you get to the final boss of the game. So yeah, pretty basic roguelike stuff. But like I said earlier, Shape of Dreams exceed in its variety and gameplay, because not many roguelikes have MOBA-like mechanics which you can completely customize and build up yourself. And now on, why I don't think you should call Shape of Dreams a MOBA-like. And well, I think most of you know MOBAs, especially League of Legends or Dota. And these games are really tactical games where you have to play with your teammates around objectives to win against the enemy team. And in Shape of Dreams you don't really have any objectives nor tactical mechanics besides making a build. And that's why I called it earlier Diablo or Path of Exile as in roguelike. Because in said games you are also making a character and just start destroying hordes of monsters to get more loot and to get even stronger. And the same formula goes for Shape of Dreams, where you also try to fight as much as you can, just so you can get as strong as you need, fight against the bosses, which some of them are actually pretty challenging. Some of the bosses are more like late game Terraria bosses, because some of them start becoming bullet hells or just with absurd amounts of stuff to dodge. And you will surely get hit, except you are kinda crazy in these types of games. And healing in Shape of Dreams is really important to get. And there are multiple ways of getting healing, like using gold from enemies to use on statues to heal up yourself, or just get a spell which heals you and your teammates. There are even characters which specializes in healing for the support mains among you, and that's where the multiplayer aspect in this game also starts shining. because some characters synergizes really well with another. Or you can just try completing a game with 3 healers. But well, now it's time to say something I really don't like in this game. And I think some of you also might don't like it. The lighting. Shape of Dreams has a really flashy and bright art style to it. And at some moments when it's somewhat chaotic, the game can quickly evolve into a flashbang and your only option to counter the effect is by making the game darker. But then it will start looking awkward. But yeah, if you can overlook something like that, I think it's a small issue. And besides that, Shape of Dreams is actually a really fun and innovative roguelike. So let's get to the final review. First, the positive things. Shape of Dreams mechanic to swap and customize your skill can be incredibly fun to figure out. Its bosses and enemies are challenging enough so you won't feel too overpowered. It has a lot of variety comparing it to other roguelikes. The multiplayer can be really fun to experiment with synergies. And some more. But let's get to the negatives. Like I said earlier, the game has a ton of effects and can be really bright if many enemies starts attacking. Some enemies can also be really annoying on harder difficulties because of the spamming of the same attacks, if you know what I mean. It only has a few characters to select and unlocking some of them can be somewhat annoying. Single player on harder difficulties can feel impossible except you are using highly optimized builds. And some more. It may sound that it has many negatives, but Shape of Dreams really is a refreshing experience. Because it doesn't follow the modern Vampire Survivors trend and tries to be somewhat different. And I really think that people who want a fun roguelike for themselves or playing with friends should look into Shape of Dreams, especially if you like games like Diablo. Before we get to the second game of this list, I just wanted to say thank you for watching so far and I plan on making more of these types of videos. And please consider liking and subscribing if you like it so far. So I apologize for the short interruption and let's get to the second game. It's the game called Necesse. Necesse was a game I had on my radar for a long time because it tries to be a mix between Terraria and Stardew Valley, which both I really like. And Necesse actually feels like a child of both of these games. So it's basically a top-down Terraria with town building, farming and NPC managing like Stardew. And also challenging fights and equipment like Terraria. It has a ton of content, classes and difficulties, which gives also a nice replayability. Oh, and I also recommend playing it multiplayer, because these type of games always hit different with friends. But anyways, let me get into the more detailed part. So, the story of Necesse is... I actually don't know. Like, I'm sorry, but I actually don't know. I don't think it's important. I guess it's your typical I want to be strong so I kill monster game. So, let's get straight to the gameplay. The game actually feels somewhat fast-paced and straight into it from the get-go. Because upon starting a world, you have a short tutorial on the top left which tells you about chopping trees, crafting and NPCs. Afterwards, you are on your own and you can do whatever you want. But I think it's the best to get straight to the underground after the tutorial. Because in Necesse, you can go from everywhere you want to the underground with the help of a ladder. In there are your typical copper, iron and gold ores, and other loot you need to get your first armor and weapons. With that, you also start thinking about which class you want to play, because like in Terraria, there are melee, ranged, mage and summoner with all their own armor, accessories and weapons. So it's smart to decide early on. And while you are gathering the materials, you will get into the fighting, start building your first few houses for NPCs, and maybe find your first strange portal, which summons the first boss of the game, the Protector of Evil. He serves as a tutorial boss of Necesse, and you can summon it wherever you want, even in your town. NPCs actually will help you fighting him. The bosses in these games actually have really cool mechanics and will get really difficult later on. And the first boss introduces you really good in these things, because he can shoot projectiles, fly into the sky, summon small monsters, and you don't have infinite time to kill him. So anyways, with him defeated you probably, if not already, start understanding the game and its mechanics. But let me tell you more about it. So for NPCs, they can spawn everywhere on the map and you can hire them to live in your town. And there are actually a ton of different NPCs which can help you gather materials, trade different items and even go with you on adventures. But for them to work, you have to make them happy by giving them food, houses and doing quests for them. Necesse actually has a whole town manage mode which reminded me of games like RimWorld, where you can manage your town and your NPCs' work time, stations, storages and happiness, etc. It's actually pretty neat, but many NPCs will only spawn in specific biomes or after defeating specific bosses. So you also have to explore and experiment with all kind of stuff. So yeah, Necesse somewhat rocks, but of course it's not perfect, so let's talk about the negatives and the positives. The positives first. So Necesse competes with many other Terraria-like games like Starbound or Core Keeper, but it also does many things different from these games. It feels really fresh and satisfying when you start understanding the mechanics of the game. Necesse weapons, accessories and other stuff are really fun to use and combine. The bosses are really well designed and all of them do fun fighting against. It has a ton of content and stuff to play with, and some more. So let's get to the negatives next. Its art style can sometimes look really empty and feel awkward, if you know what I mean. Some parts of Necesse can feel repetitive. In the early game you can feel easily overwhelmed with a ton of items and mechanics without a real tutorial to guide you. Exploring in the early game can feel somewhat slow because of lack of mobility and some minor issues more. But anyways, Necesse is a really special game and people who love Terraria or Stardew Valley and played such games and want a similar experience should try Necesse and will find most definitely joy in it. So let's get to the third and the last game of this list. Galactic Glitch. This game was recommended by 2 of my viewers, and with that it was the most recommended game that I should put in this list. And I mean, 2 guys saying that Galactic Glitch is good is enough for me to buy and play this game. And to be honest, I actually understood what they mean, because Galactic Glitch is your typical old school top-down roguelike like Isaac or Gungeon, but with a new space/cyberpunk-esque style, which I actually quite enjoyed. Galactic Glitch uses your average different character, weapons and skills, which you can change between every run, like most roguelikes does. But instead of being minor changes in this game, weapons actually completely changes your playstyle. What's also interesting about this game is its use of physics, because you can grab smaller enemies and items flying around rooms and throw these against something and it will deal damage. You can also throw sad stuff against the border of a room and it will ricochet and will deal even more damage. You can even do entire runs focusing on only that, but I will now go into the more detailed part. So the game starts pretty normally with a short tutorial explaining the game's mechanic, like attacking, skills and glitch charges, which acts like bombs or keys in Binding of Isaac. But to be honest, the lore of this game isn't anything crazy, and I actually stopped following it halfway through. Not because it is bad or anything like that, it's just nothing special. But anyways, after that short tutorial section you can start your own runs, in which you will learn about the buff system in this game, which are basically normal stat boosts, but with enough of them they give you powerful upgrades. And you will also learn how areas work. The zones in this game are pretty much like from games like Dead Cells, where you start always in the same zone, but unlock more paths and areas to go after that, and these have even more paths. So your first run will probably feel somewhat easy and you will probably defeat your first few bosses pretty fast. But the game really likes putting fake end bosses at the end of a run, just to say afterwards, oh, there's like 4 more areas after that, so try again and good luck on the next run. And this surprised me on my first few runs, because sometimes you actually finish a roguelike on like your 3rd run or something like that, and afterwards you just try finishing small stuff. But Galactic Glitch actually has an insane amount of content, but it's actually good to fail your first few tries, because with every run you unlock more weapons and robots, which expands your hub area, so you unlock skill trees and more characters. The gameplay actually feels really smooth and you start doing crazy stuff where you dodge through like 4 different attacks just to grab a small enemy, which you throw against a weak point of another enemy, and afterwards using your weapon skills, and with that clearing a room in like 5 seconds. Stuff like that is extremely satisfying to pull off. But what's neat is that it's completely optional and you can just only use your gun and focus on dodging and shooting. Galactic Glitch also has a major difficulty curve, because the more you play, the more difficult bosses and enemies you can encounter. This also gets enhanced by a Dead Cells-like system. For every time you defeat a major boss, you make your next run harder, which stacks up multiple times. But this also gives you even more stuff to explore and unlocks even more weapons. So yeah, the more I talk about it, it's pretty clear that Galactic Glitch feels like a mix between Binding of Isaac and Dead Cells, and something entirely new. But sadly, Galactic Glitch has some issues, so let me get to the last part. Let me say the positives first. So Galactic Glitch has a lot of variety for its price tag. And for players who likes older roguelikes, it can give a similar experience but with something new. The game has a lot of freedom about playstyle. It also has a really satisfying flow to it the moment you understand its mechanics, and many more. But let's get into the negatives. The game's difficulty can feel somewhat easy for players who played a lot of these types of games. And you can kill most bosses in just a few seconds without really good builds. And its later runs can take up to an hour or even more depending on your damage. The randomized skills in this game don't deliver as much impact as you want, because most of them are pretty simple stuff like one more dodge and maybe some more issues. So yeah, Galactic Glitch obviously has some flaws, but every game has them, don't they? And Galactic Glitch really is an underrated game, because for players who are tired of modern Danmakus and roguelites and just want a game which is similar to older roguelikes would almost surely like Galactic Glitch. So with that we are finished. So thank y'all so much for watching, and I hope you liked this one and maybe got a new game to keep an eye on. And please write down in the comments games that are like 10 years old at this point, but you just need to play them every now and then, because I would love to make a video about older indie games. So once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I see you in the next one. See ya!